This is augforums.com Real Talk, an unfiltered, independent perspective on Acumatica Cloud ERP. My name is Tim Rodman, and I want to mention three things in this pre-recorded intro before we get started. First, thank you to our sponsors. Our first sponsor is Paya. Paya offers Acumatica users a suite of industry-leading payment orchestration tools. Far beyond native Acumatica payments, Paya enables EMV, NFC terminals for counter sale. They offer a frictionless customer portal through their click-to-pay solution, and they support most e-commerce platforms and point-of-sale solutions used with Acumatica, such as One Retail and AcuPOS. And best of all, omni-channel reconciliation is available for all of their solutions. Our second sponsor is DataSelf. DataSelf Analytics is a revolutionary reporting solution that enables organizations to make the most informed decisions faster and easier than ever. It uniquely simplifies business intelligence, empowers anyone to build and access dashboards, and delivers critical business insight when and where you need it. Our third sponsor is 24/7 Digitize. 24/7 Digitize is an Acumatica bookkeeping service provider that helps derive the best value from your Acumatica investment by maintaining your books utilizing Acumatica's best practices and guidelines. Please take a minute to support this podcast by clicking each one of the sponsor banners located at augforums.com/sponsors. Our sponsors track clicks, and every click helps to support this podcast. The second thing I'd like to mention is that I'm always looking for victims. Guests. If you use Acumatica in any capacity, no matter how small, I'd love to talk with you. Check out augforums.com/podcast and click the link near the top of the page to learn more about being a guest on the podcast. Third and finally, I'd love to see you listed on my Rolodex. Check out augforums.com/Rolodex to find out who else is using Acumatica and read the instructions at the top to see how you can add yourself to the list. All right, that's it for the pre-recorded intro. Let's get started. Today is Monday, November 21st, 2022, and this is episode number 102, Wayne Schulz, Acumatica Service Provider Program. Hey, Wayne, thanks for coming on today.
Hi, Tim. Glad to. And I know this is a topic you and I have chatted about before, both remotely and in person when we've seen each other at various conferences. And I think sort of the general thing that kicked off our wanting to get together and have a chat is Acumatica came out with a new program that is, I guess, going to allow people to be more pure consultant than reseller. Is that your understanding?
That's my basic understanding. Yeah, that you don't get the margins that a VAR does. You don't sell it, but you are certified to consult with Acumatica. And I think it's funny from my side. I wanted to have you on because you've got a great industry perspective, even though you're not, that involved with Acumatica specifically, but as we know, this really isn't a new idea, right? This kind of thing's been around forever, and I think you've got a good perspective on it. From my perspective, I think it's kind of funny because I'm not a VAR, and I've been working with Acumatica for almost 10 years now. I don't see any reason to go get some kind of certification. I know what I'm doing. And so, it's kind of funny from my angle, so I sort of have a sarcastic look at it. But from your angle, maybe you could kind of walk us through what are your thoughts when you see a publisher like Acumatica coming out with a program like this?
Well, just for background, like I started off in my career as a CPA back in '86 when I got out of school. So it's been quite a while, and I've been working with accounting systems for, I probably worked in the CPA world for 6 or 7 years before I finally said, hey, I'm doing more work on the computer side of this business than I am on the accounting side. So I'd really like to, kind of focus on that full time. And at the time, the CPA firm said, yeah, well, you can kind of sort of do that. And then eventually they said, nah, we want you to keep doing accounting. And I said, okay, I'm going to go off and do this consulting gig on computer software. And at the time, it was that product Mass 90, right, that they've later relabeled or rebranded into Sage 100. And I started off in those days being a reseller. So I was, your typical, you sign up and you sell and you make, I don't know, it's usually about 50% of whatever you were selling. But that was back in the perpetual days where customers could come in and buy the software once and they weren't tied into constantly having to buy upgrades or make annual payments. Fast forward to today, and now most of the accounting software is sold on some type of subscription, which is generally a lot less expensive than what it used to be in the old perpetual days. So resellers may be making less money on that sale, yet you still have to cover all of the expenses. So you still have salespeople, or if you're doing it yourself, which I did for many years, you still have to take time out to travel and visit with people and essentially give them what my pet peeve in life has been in this business of consulting is a free needs analysis. Because I found that, people never want to pay for that upfront analysis of, hey, are we on the right track of buying this accounting software? Or if not, what can you tell us about why we shouldn't buy it? Or what should we look at instead? And the problem I've always had is I took years and years of my life to figure out very quickly in a conference room to tell somebody what the pros and cons of what they were considering is. And I absolutely hated as a reseller that I was essentially forced to give that kind of information away. I was forced to go into those pre-sale conferences and sit down and a lot of times if you've been through this, it's walking into a conference room with sometimes as many as 8, 10 people in there, and they're ready just to rapid fire questions about, well, our old accounting system used to do this. How is our new accounting system? And it could take you 3 or 4 hours, and then it could take you another 6 or 8 hours to pull together the quote. I hated doing that as a reseller. I just thought it was totally using up my time. I felt like I should have been able to charge for that, which I have on and off throughout the years tried to do unsuccessfully. And when I say charge, I mean for like an initial consultation. I found that that's very, very difficult to charge for unless you have some sort of relationship with the prospect. So over time, I just sort of, I guess you would call it, became jaded about the whole reselling business. And sometime around 2009, I partnered up with a larger reseller, and they handle all of the licensing, and I work as a local resource for any licensing questions from my customers. But in essence, I do 100% pure consulting. I don't have any, well, I guess you always have pressure, but I don't really have any major pressure to hit any kind of sales goals. And I also like that as well.
Can I ask you about the VAR model? So, my description of it, just the VAR business model in general. I'm curious if you agree with this. It's basically a pyramid scheme because you have to sell a certain number of deals to hit a certain margin, and you're constantly chasing that every year. Do you agree, or is that too harsh?
Um, I think that it's too harsh because I think people know what it is going in. I don't know if it's a pyramid scheme, but I think your description of what you're doing is essentially that, right? So every year, and I don't care who the publisher is, whether it's Acumatica or Sage or NetSuite or Oracle, all of these companies go through the same thing where every year or every couple of years, they raise the bar in terms of what they expect out of people to sell in order to make the same money that you were making the year before. I just tend to like to live in the world of creating this kind of recurring revenue that I'll talk about and not having to worry that my commissions are going to be reduced if I don't meet an increasing sales level next year. And usually the publishers have two ways that they can reduce your commissions. They either raise the amount that you need to sell in order to make the same amount of commission, or they lower the commission rate, right? It's pretty easy. And that's what I've seen historically has happened. Is it's either, oh, if you sold 10,000 last year, you need to sell 15,000 this year to make the same rate or be in the same tier structure. So that's what, I mean, essentially that's what drove me crazy about reselling, and I really don't miss it at all. And living in the pure consulting world, which I really have lived in since 2009, has a lot of benefits. But I do think you have to look at it, in a different way, because it's sort of a different model. When you're in the reselling world, you have to be worried about continuously moving and gathering leads and adding new names. You have to have a model for that. You can't just stop selling, or you fall off the radar of the publisher. You start to miss a tier level, and now all of a sudden you're making less money. And that could be really dangerous if you have a lot of people in your organization. So I didn't like that. And what I started off, and thankfully, one of the first things that I did is I said, if I'm going to be more of a pure consultant, the number one thing that I need to focus on is recurring revenue. Because a lot of times, like back in the day, we'd be looking at the publishers and we go, wow, these publishers are crazy. They don't know what they're doing. Why are they implementing this? Why don't they do it a different way? But the one thing that the publishers always have seemed to have gotten right is their underlying business model. The publishers move from one-off purchases to paying annual maintenance on those purchases to ultimately making that purchase be a subscription where if you stop paying, you can no longer use your system. And thankfully, the one thing that I took away when I moved from being a reseller to being a pure consultant is I need to really model my overall business strategy to the same way that I see the publishers. And the key thing that I did was recurring revenue.
Before you get into the details of that, which I think is good advice for anyone who's looking at this Acumatica service provider program, I'm curious on the Sage side, for you personally, is there some kind of similar program where you have a contractual relationship with Sage, or are you just kind of off there saying, hey, I know what I'm doing with Sage 100, and you just work people directly and there's no contract involved with Sage from your standpoint?
No, there's a similar program on the Sage side. So I think they call it certified consultant. You pay a fee per year. It's not a lot. It's not a lot of money. I think I don't really handle the details of what you have to do to qualify for it anymore. So I'm not a good person to speak for that. But there's definitely an annual renewal, an annual fee that needs to be paid. In some cases, depending upon the year, there's also an assessment test that you take.
And what's the advantage for you that you're now officially certified, that you can open cases? Why do you even do it?
Open cases. Yeah,
Got it.
so as a certified consultant, that gives you access to be able to call for support.
Got it.
And
Okay.
and I don't think it's only on the Sage level. I think kind of across the board, that gives you access to be able to open cases with your publisher and say, hey, look, I have this issue. And 95% of the time, if you're calling, you're probably calling them to see whether they've heard of it before or they know about it, and it's not just listed somewhere in their knowledge base.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay.
So I'd say that's kind of the key benefit for certified consultants. In Sage, certainly, I don't, everybody may be a little different, but I haven't gotten any leads or anything like that in years, other than, you know, keeping what I've gone out and hunted on my own.
No, that's great. I think that's spot on for how I would see this program playing out for Acumatica. You can open cases, you get a little badge that you're certified, which to me doesn't mean a whole lot. But yeah, otherwise it's you. You got to go find the work.
Right. And the publisher, realistically, unless you have a really good relationship, they're not really bound to send you, hey, so and so called up and they need a consultant over in your neck of the woods. Could you call them? Maybe I'm probably actually really just bad at maintaining that publisher relationship. And maybe I'm just an odd duck and I haven't gotten a lot of those type of leads. But overall, I kind of think that that's happened with other people.
Yeah, I've heard that story from many people, including VARs. Yeah, I don't think that's unusual at all. You just got to expect to be able to generate your own stuff, right? And even if you get stuff from the publisher, you just can't rely on that continuing.
Right. And that's changed an awful lot over the years. So like way back, like in 1986, when I jumped out of college, the landscape was you're a reseller and the people you sold to lived in your state. Because the internet wasn't around back then. Like I know, like I'm dating myself a lot, but the internet had just started to become prevalent and people were accessing it way back then through this, these things like AOL or CompuServe. So people that were looking for accounting software really had no other way to do it other than to look local, which is not at all the case these days. I have customers in Hawaii, California. And I'm just as likely to get a customer outside of my state as I am inside my state. So that's a big, big change from how it used to be with being a reseller versus a consultant.
So you've got the contractual relationship with the publisher. It gives you some base level of things you can do, but then it's really about building your business. So yeah, I'll let you get back to the recurring revenue side and what you've learned over the years.
Yeah, with the recurring revenue, what I started really early when I began working with consulting, first as a reseller and then later as a consultant only, is I required all of my customers to enroll in a support plan directly through us. Didn't matter if they also had one with the publisher. If they wanted to call us, we enrolled them in what we now refer to as an access agreement, which is a fixed amount per year. And it covers all of the questions and answers that the customer may come to expect from us, that in many cases have seen other consultants write off as, well, that was a quick question. We're not going to be able to bill for that. I got out of the quick question business really early, and I found that as I took on new customers, that it was a lot easier to tell them this is the way that I do business, and are you interested in doing it that way? It's a little harder when you have existing customers to tell them, oh, I'm going to move you over from just paying me hourly for anything that's not a quick question, and I want you to pay me now a fixed fee per year. It was very much easier in the earlier days to just start it right off that way and say, okay, if we're going to start doing your work on your accounting system, it's going to be at X dollars per year. And we set that expectation, and once we set it, it became a recurring revenue stream for us. So in some years, customers use a lot of that, and in some years, they may not call hardly at all. Somewhat like insurance, right? So, but in times that they really need it, they're covered by us, and we do everything we can, including if we need to, work into the night to get something fixed, etc. So that aspect of the recurring revenue has been really key for a consulting only relationship, because largely I didn't have that constantly reselling to new customers. and bringing on so many new customers that I really didn't have to have a recurring relationship with them. I could make the money with getting them up to speed, getting them installed, and do consulting when they first bought the accounting system, and then hop on to the next one that I would install and make the money in that first installation. I was doing far fewer new installations, so those existing customers became all that much more important, and it became key that I turn them into a recurring revenue type relationship.
Well, that's good advice because if you're the VAR, your recurring revenue is the margins. And so you need some different kind of base if you're just going to be the service provider. So that makes a lot of sense. I think that's good advice for anyone looking at the Acumatica service provider program. I'm curious, though, your thoughts from the customer side. This is a story that I hear rather frequently where you sign up, you implement, you've got the VAR's attention because they want to get you live. And then after you're live, it's not the VAR's fault, it's the business model, in my opinion. The VAR's got to then go chase the next deal, right? So their attention shifts after you're live to the next one and the next one and the next one. And a lot of times the customer just feels neglected, right? And it's really, in my opinion, the business model. But, from your standpoint, what's that experience like versus a customer working at the bar versus a certified consultant service provider?
Well, again, in the certified consultant, I set myself up with a recurring revenue. So I would tell customers, you can call me as many times as you need to. So they're not, a lot of times we would see customers are hesitant to call because they think it's going to be, well, they're going to get a bill for this 15-minute call or what have you. And instead of that, we fought it by saying, you're just going to pay an annual fee. And if you run into an issue, please call. And shockingly, because one of the things that people would say when I tell them this, they say, oh, I couldn't do that with my customers. They call all the time and I would never make any money. And I can tell you unequivocally, that just isn't the case. Do you have some customers that call an awful lot? Hell yeah, they do. Um, do you have some customers that never call? Yep. Are they always the same? No, from year to year, they have different requirements. So it's sort of like when you set those recurring revenue access agreements, some of the high usage ones are going to be leveled out by the people that hardly ever call and vice versa. And you typically don't get taken to the cleaners. And my experience is most customers are really okay if you come to them and say, hey, look, you know what? I made a mistake. This should probably be either more money, less money, different arrangement. I've had to do that within, throughout this pandemic 3 or 4 times. And all the customers were okay with it. And if there was ever an issue, I always err on the side of the customer. They say, no, we're not paying you another dime. I'd be like, okay, we have an agreement for a year. I'm going to live by it because that's the agreement we made, but we may not be able to renew it. And very, very few that I can think of actually take advantage of that or leave and go and try to find somebody else that might be cheaper for them.
That's interesting. That's maybe you used the insurance example earlier, and it does sound like insurance. But my response to that is, well, insurance companies have teams of actuaries, highly paid actuaries who run very sophisticated models to come up with those premiums. You don't have that luxury, right? So it sounds like it's more of a trial and error type of approach with you.
To some extent, yes. To the other extent is I know the things that are going to typically run up a lot of time. And those are what I would put in as exclusions. Let me give you a couple examples. Big time sink can be upgrades. We don't include those unless the customer said, hey, we want an agreement where every year you're going to help us with an upgrade. Another big issue, disaster recovery, right? I've had customers that come and say, yeah, we were putting in a new type of disk array and everything got hosed and we want you to recover it. We have specific exclusions that we say, no, this access agreement doesn't mean we are full-time employees. There's certain things that are outside the scope of this agreement. And what I found is customers are perfectly fine with it. I don't, I honestly don't know that a lot of mine read it real close. Some do. But a lot of them are just like, hey, as long as you're upfront with us, as long as you're returning our calls timely, right? That's the key right there. People always ask, what's the secret to keeping customers? Why would a customer leave one consultant and go to another? Not returning their calls timely. That's huge. Probably the number one reason that I hear from customers about why they leave one firm for another is they're not getting their calls returned timely. So
I'm thinking of other exclusions. What about training? Like if you get someone who has high turnover and you're just getting a lot of calls about the
you
same
know,
thing for different
it
people.
it depends, and yes, I do go back to them. I tend to look and say, when is their renewal coming up? If they're within a few months of renewing their access agreement, I may just suck it up and do the training. Now that things are a lot more remotely, it's a lot easier, right? Most people don't want to be trained for like a full 8 hours. That's mind numbing. So you find in reality, the training is usually like an hour, 2 hours. Example, I have a customer, very, very small. They run a gravel pit. All their people just left. And there's two people that came in that don't know how to cut checks. And while I'm trying to teach them how to do it, they have to also watch the window for these big dump trucks that come through and get weighed. But I'm able to do it like for about an hour or so. And if it becomes too much, I go to the customer and I say, you know what, either on the renewal or I propose, hey, we need to have some paid training. You'd be really surprised how many customers are okay with that. What customers usually are not okay with is just send them the bill. Like they're not okay with getting a surprise bill for like $6,000 and you call up and try to justify it by saying, hey, your controller left, so what did you expect me to do?
It's all about knowing up front. I agree.
Yeah, I think you have to have that conversation up front.
Yeah, so you described it as recurring revenue, but up front. But really what I'm taking away is it's really more of a recurring relationship, and that your model is to be there on an ongoing basis, not just swoop in to implement and then move on to the next one. And then you kind of work out the money part of it and come up with the right numbers for the recurring revenue part. But the model seems to me to be more focused on recurring relationship. It's almost like you want them to call. Whereas a VAR, it's sort of like we implement, we get you live, and you cross your fingers and hope that you don't get a call so that you can focus on the next one.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think a lot of ours are still stuck on the old hourly billing method where they're like, okay, we'll send you a bill when and if you call. And that kind of billing also forces you to always be selling, because if you're not doing that, customers can just sit tight and say, well, we don't have any problems. We're not upgrading. And I don't know how you make your money if you get into that sort of, that sort of era where just customers aren't calling and relying on billable hours.
So this is great. I know a quick time check. I think you said you had about half an hour for this. Are we still looking at wrapping it up here?
Yeah. So, I mean, my key thing here is what's so great about being just a consultant versus a reseller, right? So if you're looking at this saying, hey, which way should I go? Things that I like, I keep 100%. I generate my own recurring revenue. It's not tied into a commission that I have to worry about that commission is going to change at some point. Um, I kind of keep everything that I go through and am able to sell in terms of consulting. The downside to being a consultant only is you don't have as much of that commission, which can be material. A lot of people do make a lot of money, commission on renewals, on subscription, what have you. And if you have a good model where you have people kind of running that area, it's a sizable amount of money. And as a consultant, you can't rely on that to subsidize other parts of your business. So as a consultant, you really have to be thinking ahead of time, how do I keep this revenue recurring?
Yeah, I really appreciate you kind of outlining your thoughts and your decades of experience doing this. I think
It make me
anyone
feel
who's
old when you say decades like that.
yeah. But yeah, it is, right. I mean, it is what it is. You got a lot of experience with it, and anyone who's looking at the Acumatica service provider program and thinking about it, I think your experience is very valuable to consider because you've been down the road and you've been doing it for um, longer than me. Can I say it that way?
Yeah, I guess that's a polite way of putting it. I mean, I think the key is when you get into a new customer, make sure you put them into a model that is going to work for you business wise 5 years down the road. Personally, I don't do any hourly billing, all fixed price billing. How you start off your relationship with that customer is going to be how you're probably going to work with them for a while. So give that some good thought.
Well, hey, I appreciate the thoughts. I think you're a great person for this perspective, and I appreciate you making the time today. All right. Well, that's it for now. We'll catch you on the next episode of AUGforums.com Real Talk. Thanks for listening, and take care.